Kevin Costner stood at the pulpit, his voice breaking, as he looked out at a sea of mourners. He wasn't just a movie star delivering a speech. He was a man grieving a friend he had carried in ways the world never truly understood. For so many, Whitney Houston will always be remembered for that voice, soaring, flawless, unforgettable. But for Costner, she was something else. She was the nervous young woman he had fought to cast in The Bodyguard, the woman who doubted herself even as she was about to make history. Their connection was undeniable on screen. The protective bodyguard, the fragile superstar. It looked like Hollywood magic, but it was rooted in something real. A bond that began when cameras rolled and endured long after the final credits faded. For decades, Costner kept quiet about the truth of what they shared, the weight of what he carried after her death. Until at last, he revealed it. So what was the truth Kevin Costner had hidden all those years about Whitney Houston? Why does it still bring him to tears today? And why does their story even now feel like one of Hollywood's most haunting love letters? When the early 1990s arrived, Kevin Costner was at the peak of his career. He had already become one of Hollywood's most bankable stars after Dances with Wolves, won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and after Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves dominated the box office. Audiences saw him as the rugged hero, the steady presence, the man who could carry both action and drama with equal weight. Studios were desperate to keep him attached to their biggest projects, and when Warner Brothers approached him with The Bodyguard, it looked like another guaranteed hit. But there was a problem. The script had been floating around Hollywood since the 1970s. At one point, it was offered to Steve McQueen. Later, it circled Diana Ross. For years, no one could quite get the formula right. By the time Costner agreed to star, the project was viewed as risky. A romance between a hardened protector and a vulnerable superstar could easily feel forced. Whoever played opposite Costner would need to bring both charisma and fragility. And in Hollywood, at that moment, there wasn't a clear choice. Then Whitney Houston's name came up. She was the biggest singer in the world, with a voice that sold out arenas and filled radio stations across the globe. But she wasn't an actress. Not once had she carried a role on screen. Studio executives balked at the idea. They worried she would look out of place next to Costner, that her lack of acting experience would weigh down the film. For them, it was safer to go with a proven Hollywood name. But Kevin Costner saw something no one else did. He believed Whitney Houston wasn't just a singer. He believed she had a presence, a vulnerability and a truth in her that no other actress could match. To him, the story of The Bodyguard wasn't about a polished movie star falling for a bodyguard. It was about a woman with the world's eyes on her, yet still wrestling with doubt, fear, and insecurity. Costner knew Whitney could deliver that because she was already living it. He fought for her. In meeting after meeting, he insisted that Whitney was the only choice. He promised to support her on set, to make sure her strengths shined, and to help her where she felt unsure. Warner Brothers eventually relented, trusting Costner's judgment. With that decision, history was set in motion. When Whitney stepped onto the set for the first time, she was terrified. She had never acted before, and the pressure weighed on her shoulders. She worried she wouldn't look convincing, that her beauty wasn't Hollywood enough, that audiences would laugh at her instead of believe her. What she didn't realize was that Costner saw those fears not as weaknesses, but as the very qualities that would make her performance unforgettable. He reassured her, gently but firmly, that she belonged. In later years, Costner admitted that if Whitney had said no to The Bodyguard, he may have walked away from the film entirely. That was how strongly he believed in her. He didn't just cast her, he staked his own career on her ability to deliver. And deliver she did. By the time cameras rolled, their on-screen chemistry was already electric, the kind of natural connection you cannot manufacture. Yet, in those early days, when few believed she could handle the role, Kevin Costner was the one voice standing firm in her corner. But why was he so determined? Why would a man at the height of his career risk everything on an untested singer? The answer lies in what happened once the cameras started rolling. The first days of filming were not easy. Whitney Houston, the most celebrated singer of her generation, walked onto the set of The Bodyguard, carrying a kind of nervous energy few had ever seen from her. She could command stadiums filled with tens of thousands of fans, yet here she was, shaking under the glare of a movie camera. Hollywood was not her stage, and she knew the world was waiting to see her fail. Kevin Costner noticed immediately. He had seen many first-time actors before, but Whitney's nerves weren't about ego or vanity. They were rooted in fear. Fear that she would let down her fans. Fear that she wasn't beautiful enough for the role. Fear that she didn't belong beside a star like Costner. More than once, she pulled him aside and confessed her doubts. She worried her inexperience would be obvious, that her expressions weren't right, that she wasn't giving enough. Instead of brushing off her fears, Costner listened. Then he guided. He reminded her that the role wasn't about perfection, it was about being real. He even had scenes restructured and lines reworked so her natural presence could come through. In the moments where Whitney hesitated, Costner would sometimes pause filming altogether, giving her space to breathe and collect herself before the cameras rolled again. That patience paid off. Slowly, Whitney began to trust herself. And when she did, something remarkable happened. The chemistry between her and Costner lit up the screen. It wasn't forced. It wasn't written. It was born out of her fragility and his steadiness. The very dynamic at the heart of the movie, a powerful woman in public, yet vulnerable in private, protected by a man who understood her, was reflected in the way they worked together day after day. One scene in particular came to define this connection: the nightclub rescue. Costner's character, Frank Farmer, sweeps Whitney's Rachel Marin into his arms and carries her to safety. On the surface, it's a dramatic, romantic moment, but behind the scenes, it carried a deeper truth. That image of Costner lifting her was a mirror of their real relationship during production. He wasn't just playing her protector on film, he was becoming one in reality. Crew members whispered about it. They could feel the energy between the two of them. It wasn't just acting. The way Costner looked at Whitney, the way Whitney leaned into him during rehearsals, it felt authentic. Rumors began to swirl about whether their bond went beyond friendship. Both always insisted it did not, but what no one could deny was that the camera captured something alive, something that could not be faked. Then came the music. Whitney's recording of "I Will Always Love You" wasn't originally planned for the film. Costner suggested it. He believed Dolly Parton's song, sung in Whitney's voice, could hold the emotional center of the story. The studio hesitated. Costner persisted. The rest is history. Whitney's version became one of the best-selling singles of all time, forever tied to The Bodyguard. By the end of filming, everyone knew the movie had transformed from a risky gamble into a cultural event. Costner had been right. Whitney had not only proven herself as an actress, she had created an iconic performance that blurred the line between her real insecurities and her character's struggles. For Whitney, the set of The Bodyguard became a place where she was allowed to be vulnerable. For Costner, it became a chance to step into a role much larger than the one he played on screen. But when the cameras stopped rolling, their connection didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, and it left Costner with a responsibility he carried long after the film ended. When The Bodyguard was released in late 1992, it didn't just succeed, it exploded. The film grossed over $400 million worldwide, becoming one of the highest-earning romances of all time. But even more astonishing was the soundtrack. Whitney's rendition of "I Will Always Love You" dominated charts, selling millions of copies, and eventually becoming one of the best-selling singles in history. Suddenly, Whitney Houston wasn't just a singer. She was a global cultural force. Her voice tied forever to the image of Kevin Costner's protective embrace. For Costner, the success was confirmation of what he already knew. He had been right to fight for Whitney. He had seen something in her that no one else wanted to risk believing. And now the world was seeing it too. But while fans and critics marveled at their on-screen romance, what mattered to Costner was the quiet friendship that continued once the cameras shut off. Whitney and Kevin didn't live in the same worlds. She was a touring superstar, often on the road, grappling with the relentless demands of fame and the growing strain of her marriage to Bobby Brown. Costner was raising a family, balancing fatherhood with his Hollywood career. Yet when they spoke, there was no pretense. Whitney trusted him. She confided in him during moments of doubt, and Costner, steady as ever, reassured her that she was more than the tabloids, more than the chaos swirling around her. He often described her as someone carrying a gift too immense for one person to bear. That voice, that presence, it drew the world to her. But it also weighed her down. He saw her as a woman who could command a stadium yet still walk into a room unsure of herself. That contrast haunted him. It was the very essence of why he believed in her for The Bodyguard. The world saw perfection, but Kevin saw vulnerability, and it made him protective of her long after the film ended. Over the years, the two would occasionally reconnect, not publicly, rarely in the glare of cameras, but in phone calls, quiet check-ins, and conversations that reminded them of what they had built together. Costner never sought headlines with Whitney's name, never exploited their connection. He kept their bond private, which perhaps made it even more meaningful. Meanwhile, Whitney's struggles became more visible. Her marriage to Bobby Brown was plagued by turbulence, and her battles with addiction and pressure from the industry often played out in public. For many, her decline was another celebrity tragedy unfolding in slow motion. But for Kevin, it was painful in a different way. He remembered the Whitney who doubted herself on set, who needed someone steady, who was more fragile than anyone realized. Watching her unravel in public left him with a sense of helplessness. He wasn't by her side, yet he felt her pain as though he were. Still, whenever he spoke about her, Costner's words were protective. He never reduced her to her struggles. He never dismissed her legacy. To him, Whitney remained the woman who had once whispered her fears on a movie set, and then turned those fears into a performance that electrified the world. Their friendship, though rarely in the spotlight, endured through time, through distance, through the kind of unshakable loyalty that doesn't fade even when life takes people in different directions. But that loyalty, that sense of responsibility, became unbearable when the unthinkable happened in 2012. Because when Whitney Houston died, Kevin Costner carried not just grief, but a weight of regret he could never escape. February 11, 2012. News broke that Whitney Houston was gone, only 48 years old. A voice that had once soared across the world silenced in a Beverly Hills hotel room. Fans were stunned, her family shattered, the music industry left in disbelief. But for Kevin Costner, the loss cut much deeper. He wasn't just mourning a colleague from decades earlier, he was grieving a woman he had carried in his heart ever since their time together on The Bodyguard. When the family planned her funeral, Costner received an unexpected request. Would he deliver the eulogy? It wasn't typical for Hollywood co-stars to take the pulpit at such an intimate ceremony, yet Whitney's loved ones knew. They knew Kevin had meant something to her. They knew his words would carry the kind of truth only a trusted friend could give. So on that winter day in Newark, New Jersey, Kevin Costner stood before the world inside New Hope Baptist Church, the very place where Whitney had first sung as a little girl in the choir. He looked out at the congregation, family, gospel singers, industry giants and fans who had traveled from across the country. His voice was unsteady, but his message was clear. Whitney was more than the headlines, more than her struggles. She was a woman who doubted herself, even when she should have known she was extraordinary. Costner told the world a secret he had kept since The Bodyguard. Whitney had been terrified to audition. She had shown up late that first day, her nerves so overwhelming she had smeared her makeup and wondered if she belonged. But Kevin had reassured her, telling her she was beautiful enough, talented enough, more than enough. He believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. That was the truth he carried to her funeral, that beneath the superstar was someone fragile, someone who needed to be reminded of her worth. And it was Kevin who had been there in those private moments, steadying her when no one else could. His words broke through the silence of grief. Whitney was nervous, he admitted to the mourners. But I told her she looked beautiful. In that moment, the image of the glamorous, untouchable diva dissolved. What remained was the Whitney he had known. A woman wrestling with insecurity, yet still capable of electrifying the world with a single note. The eulogy lasted nearly 20 minutes, yet it felt timeless. It wasn't a speech from a Hollywood star. It was a confession from a man who had loved his friend deeply, who had fought for her in the beginning, and who was still protecting her in the end. For many, Costner's words became the defining tribute of that day, not just because of what he said, but because of how he said it, with tenderness, with regret, with the unmistakable weight of a bond that had never left him. When he stepped down from the pulpit, the church was in tears. Those who had come to mourn Whitney Houston left with a fuller picture of the woman behind the spotlight, the Whitney Costner had fought for, the Whitney he still carried with him. Yet even as he honored her publicly, there was something more. A truth he admitted only later, when the world asked what Whitney Houston had truly meant to him, and why her death left a wound that never healed. In the years after Whitney Houston's death, Kevin Costner spoke sparingly about her. He wasn't one to seek interviews or retell old stories for attention, but whenever her name came up, his expression shifted. The steady confidence that defined him would soften into something more fragile, more exposed, and slowly, piece by piece, he began to share the truth he had carried in silence. Costner admitted that he never stopped missing Whitney. To him, she wasn't just the superstar the world adored. She was the woman he had championed when no one else would. He revealed that his greatest regret was not doing more to protect her when the weight of fame began to crush her. He wasn't by her side during her most difficult years, and he confessed that part of him always wished he had been. For Costner, their story wasn't just about a film or a soundtrack. It was about what happened in between the scenes. When Whitney's guard came down and she let him see the doubts that gnawed at her, she had confided her fears about her looks, her talent, her place in Hollywood, and he had reassured her, again and again, that she was more than enough. After her passing, he admitted that those moments stayed with him, because in many ways Whitney never believed what he told her. In one interview, Costner shared that when Whitney died, it felt like losing a family member. He described her as someone he had carried in his heart ever since the Bodyguard, someone who had left a permanent mark on him. The truth, he revealed, was that he never stopped thinking of her as the woman he once fought for, not the troubled celebrity, not the tragic figure, but the friend who had looked at him on set with uncertainty in her eyes, needing his steadiness to move forward. Costner confessed that he still sees her in that final scene of The Bodyguard, when Frank Farmer carries Rachel Marin out of danger. That image, his arms around her trust placed entirely in him, became more than a movie moment. It became the way he remembered her. It became the truth he carried after her death, that he had once been able to protect her, but in the real world, he could not. Even now, Costner admits that Whitney's loss feels like unfinished business. He wonders what might have happened if he had been closer, if he had reached out more often, if he had reminded her one more time that she was stronger than she realized. Those are the regrets he still carries, the what-ifs that bring him to tears when he speaks of her today. For fans, the story of Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston is about a movie, a song, a moment in pop culture that will never fade. But for Costner, it has always been something more. It was about friendship, loyalty, and a truth he kept hidden for years, that Whitney Houston was the one co-star who left him with both pride and heartbreak in equal measure. And that is why, even now, Kevin Costner says her memory never leaves him. Because some roles don't end when the credits roll, some roles follow you forever. Looking back, the story of Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston feels almost cinematic in itself. Two icons from different worlds. One a Hollywood leading man at the height of his powers, the other a singer with a voice that could stop time, brought together for a single project that would change both of their lives forever. The Bodyguard wasn't just a film. It became a cultural landmark, a love story immortalized not only on screen but in the music that accompanied it. Yet, the deeper story is what lived behind those performances. To millions of fans, Costner and Houston's chemistry seemed almost too real to be scripted. But what audiences didn't see was the fragile foundation beneath it. A first-time actress battling insecurities, and a seasoned star determined to lift her up. Kevin didn't just carry Whitney on screen. He carried her through moments of doubt, through the fear of not being good enough, through the pressure of stepping into a role the whole world was watching. That trust born on a film set never faded. In the years that followed, Whitney's voice became both her greatest gift and her heaviest burden. Fame magnified her struggles, turning her private battles into public spectacles. But through it all, Costner never spoke unkindly of her, never reduced her to the headlines. He remembered the Whitney who whispered her fears to him, the Whitney who laughed on set, the Whitney who trusted him when she wasn't sure she could trust herself. And when her life ended too soon, Costner stepped forward once more. His eulogy didn't come from a co-star promoting a film long past. It came from a man who had been changed by her presence, who wanted the world to know the truth that Whitney Houston had always been enough, that she had doubted herself when she should have been confident, that she had been fragile, yes, but also extraordinary. In speaking those words, Costner gave her back some of the dignity and tenderness that the world had stripped away. What he revealed in the years after her death only deepened that truth. He admitted that he still carried regrets, that he wished he had been there more, that he wondered if he could have protected her in real life the way he had on screen. That was the weight he lived with, not just the pride of having helped launch her acting career, but the ache of knowing her story ended in tragedy. His honesty struck a chord, because it wasn't polished Hollywood nostalgia. It was raw, human grief. And that is why their story resonates still. It isn't just about a movie or a song. It's about the way two people found connection in a world that demanded so much from both of them. It's about the truth that even legends are vulnerable, and that sometimes the greatest roles we play are the ones no camera ever captures. The role of friend, of confidant, of protector. For Kevin Costner, Whitney Houston will always be more than a co-star. She will always be the woman he believed in when others doubted. The woman whose memory still brings him to tears. The woman whose voice echoes not only in music history, but in his heart. Their bond was brief in years but lasting in meaning. And in the end, Costner's final revelation is one we all feel when remembering someone we've lost. That love and regret often live side by side, and that some goodbyes never feel complete. For more emotional stories, check out this video.